Modes are probably one of the most discussed things for us guitar players, especially in the last 10 or so years. So let's settle it. What are modes? What do they sound like? How should we use them? When should we use them? And do you actually need to know them? These are the questions I will thoroughly answer in today's video. First, what are they not? They are not scales, and they're not shapes that we play on the guitar. There is no such thing as a Dorian shape or the Lydian shape, the Aeolian shape. Those things literally don't exist. All those terms are referring to one thing, and that is simply the major scale. Typically, when we use the term scale, most of the time we're talking about the major scale, possibly the harmonic minor scale or the melodic minor scale. Specifically today, we're just going to be talking about the major scale, but the same concepts that apply with the major scale and looking at the modes of the major scale will apply also to harmonic minor and melodic minor. So let's quickly dive into what the major scale is. I'm not going to go crazy with the theory of the major scale today. I have a whole separate video called The Ultimate Guide to the Major Scale that I'll link down below that you should check out if you kind of just starting off with the major scale, because understanding the major scale is a big part of starting to understand modes. So if you don't understand the major scale yet and how it applies all over the fretboard, definitely go check that out and learn that first, and then you can start applying some of these concepts a little bit more thoroughly. But basically all the major scale is that we take one note, whatever note you want to choose. We're going to talk about C major today, so we take a C note, and we follow this formula of movements: a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, okay? And that gives us the C major scale. What is that? We start off with a C note, we go a whole step up to D, whole step up to E, then a half step up to F, whole step up to G, whole step up to A, a whole step up to B, and then a half step back to C. That's all we're doing. And that formula applies to all 12 notes that we see in music, and that will guarantee that you create the major scale. All right, so now that we have the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, we can now think about what kind of intervals we're seeing. We're seeing, obviously, our root note is a C. Then we're seeing the D note, and that's acting as a major second interval. Then we have our major third, which is E. Then our perfect fourth, which is our F note. We have the perfect fifth, which is G. And then we have the major sixth, which is going to be A. Then the major seven, that is going to be the B note. So that's the intervals you'll always see in a major scale. It has a major second. It's going to have a major third. It's going to have a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, a major sixth, and a major seventh. I would write this down. This is super important to understand. And later on, as we're diving into modes, it's one of the ways it's gonna help us understand the modes by looking at what kind of intervals are found within that mode. Because really, that's what's creating the different sound, is we're creating a resolution point, and then other intervals are being played over that, and it creates a certain sound. Now, the next step up above the major scale is when we start stacking thirds. When we stack thirds, we start getting chords. This is also very important to learn and memorize. Is over the one, we always see a major chord, of course. Right, that's just 1, 3, 5, C, E, G, gives us a C major chord. The second, which is gonna be the D, it always builds a minor chord. It's gonna be D, F, A. Right? And the second of every major scale is gonna build a minor chord. That's the important thing to memorize too. The third of a major scale always builds a minor chord as well. In this case, it's going to be E minor. The fourth and fifth always build a major chord. So we have F major and G major. Now, if we keep stacking thirds, those change. One's a major 7 chord, one's a dominant 7. We're not going to dive into that today. We don't really need too much of that. But understanding that's where these chords are coming from. We take the major scale, which is that formula of whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, and then we can stack thirds based off of that, and that gives us chords. And also, the 1's always major, the 2, 3 are always minor, the 4, 5 are always major, and then the 6, which is going to be A, C, E. That's going to be A minor. The 6 is always minor. The 7 is a little weird, okay? We're not going to see that very much, but it's a diminished triad, builds up to a half diminished 7 chord. It's kind of a strange one. It's kind of the oddball. We're not going to talk too much about that, but understanding that 1, 4, 5 is always major, 2, 3, 6 always minor. That's going to be super, super valuable and important when you dive into the practical side of using modes on the guitar. All right, one thing to keep in mind is when you see something like this, when you're seeing things like that, all you're actually seeing is the major scale, the 7 notes of the major scale that we just talked about. The C, D, E, F, G, A, B in that case of C major, that's all you were seeing. Nothing modal was happening there whatsoever. This brings us to a very, very important question. What is a mode? A mode is simply when you have a note of the major scale that is acting as the tonal center, and it's not the root note. So in this case, if the tonal center is any note other than C, so if it's D, if it's E, if it's F, G, A, B, it is now creating a modal sound. The notes are still the exact same. It's still going to be the notes of C major, which is C, D, E, F, G, A, B. But the ear is going to hear a tonal center, a resolution point that's not C, and it's therefore going to create a modal sound. It's really that simple. It's just the major scale, but your ear's hearing resolution to one of the 6 other notes of the scale other than the root note. I'm going to quickly play the C major scale up and down, position 1, the 3-number string pattern of it, but I'm going to change drone notes. I'm going to change from a C to a D, E, F, G, A, B, and you're going to hear how just playing the same notes over a different tonal center can create a completely different sound. Now, obviously, that was a very kind of brief drone sound in the background. There's better ways to exemplify the modal sound, but that was me just literally taking the notes from position 1 of the C major scale, changing possible tonal centers, going through C note, D note, E, F, G, A, B, and kind of trying to demonstrate how that can affect the sound and make it sound modal. Now, you obviously kind of heard it a little bit there, but each mode has a slightly different flavor, and it creates a different sound and kind of an emotional state kind of based off what's going on. And it's not because we're playing different scale shapes or anything like that. It's just what happens. The intervals are changing because the tonal center is changing, and therefore it's creating this particular sound. Now, those were just drone notes. If we built out to chord progressions or bigger extended chords, we could really exaggerate the modal sound. But even with a drone, a simple drone, you can kind of create those modal sounds pretty easily. How should we use modes? It really comes down to the musical situation that you're in and also the emotion and story that you want to tell. Because each mode really allows for a different emotional state. Now, if you just have one static note, which is what I was just playing over, you have almost kind of endless flexibility of even what scale to use, what mode to use. You really have nothing holding you back. Just looking at the major scale modes, if we add a 1/5, like a power chord, something like this, we can play 6 of the 7 modes. The only mode we couldn't technically play is Locrian because we have a perfect 5th. We'll get into this a little bit later, but Locrian has a flatted 5th, so we could play any mode technically because we're only hearing 2 notes. There's nothing forcing us into a particular modal sound. Now, if I add the major 3rd and play C major, slightly out of tune, unfortunately, now I can play one of the major modes that we find within the major scale, and that's obviously the major scale or Ionian, or it could be Lydian, which is built off the 4th, or it could be Mixolydian, which is built off the 5th. So we could see that a couple different ways, right? So now we narrowed our possibilities down a little bit because of that. Now, if I played a C minor, I now can play one of the modes built off the 2nd, the 3rd, or the 6th of a major scale. So that'd be Dorian, which is off the 2nd, or we could play Phrygian, which is based off the 3rd, or we can play Aeolian, which is based off the 6th. And so that actually brings us to another great thing to memorize is also the modal names and what they're built off of. It's really important to know that. So if it's built off the 1, that's technically Ionian. We call that the major scale most of the time, unless you're in some special musical situations. You would prefer to call that the major scale. Most musicians are going to understand that as the major scale, but it's cool to know the modal name. That's Ionian. That's just C major, C Ionian, same exact thing. Now, the mode built off the 2nd of the major scale is Dorian. So that's always going to be Dorian, no matter where you're at. If you're in G major, you just go to the 2nd note, it's going to be an A note, it's A Dorian now. Phrygian is built off the 3rd of every major scale. Lydian is built off the 4th of the major scale. And Mixolydian is built off the 5th. And then the 6th is commonly called the minor scale, but it's actually just the Aeolian mode. Most people will call that the minor scale if you're just communicating basic music terms to someone. It's going to be weird if you start throwing out Aeolian, but it is called the Aeolian mode nonetheless. And then the last one is built off the 7th scale degree, and that is called Locrian. So the 7 names are Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. And as I was saying before, how should we use these? It kind of depends on the context, right? If I'm given just one note as a drone, I can explore and experiment with any mode, any kind of scale that I really want to. Now, when they start putting a 5th in there, that narrows my possibilities down a little bit, right? I can still pretty much play 6 of the 7 major scale modes, no problem. But then we start throwing in the 3rd. Is it a major 3rd or a minor 3rd? And this goes back to why I said it's super important to remember that 1, 4, 5 always build out to major chords because they also build out to major modes. The major modes are obviously the major scale or Ionian, then Lydian and Mixolydian. Those are our major modes found within the major scale. Our minor modes, minor bass modes, are going to be Dorian, which is built off the 2, Phrygian, which is built off the 3rd, and then Aeolian, which is built off the 6. So 2, 3, 6. It's super important to remember that. And later on, when we start looking at how to practically and easily play this on guitar, that's going to come very, very in handy. When we hear the term Lydian, we need to think major. When we hear Mixolydian, we think major. When we hear Dorian, we need to think minor first. It's going to really, really help out in how we approach the instrument later on. And that really becomes important when we think about how should we use these. We think about what is being given to us in the music right now. You know, is it power chords where I have a lot more freedom? Is it some big extended chord with like 6 notes in it that's actually limiting me to what I can play? Or is it just one note where I have almost endless possibilities? That changes things. Are we looking at a chord progression? What is the chord progression? That's going to force us and narrow our possibilities down. So understanding the different notes of the chord progression and stuff like that is also going to tell you, okay, I can use a mode here. I can use this mode here. I'm just going to use the major scale for this situation, or I'm going to play Dorian here. So we got to look at kind of everything and kind of what musical story is naturally being told in the rhythm section. And then when we play lead guitar over it, we kind of fill into that emotional situation as well. Now, probably the most important question is when should we use them? And that was kind of what I was briefly talking about a second ago. It's partly whenever you want to, like whenever you want to create that sound. But it's also knowing the situation you're in. So if you're playing with a piano player and he's playing all 7th chords, right? And he's playing a 4-chord progression, that's all 7 chords. Well, he's narrowing down your possibilities modally. If he was just playing 4 chords that were power chords, just 1 and 5, well, he's still narrowing down your possibilities modally, but there's still a lot more possibilities that you can kind of mess around with. But also there's a pacing element. So, if I'm playing a progression, and I'm going like, right, where I'm moving chords rapidly, well, that's going to also limit me in a certain way as well, because when chords are moving that rapidly, it limits what I can do, and I almost have to take every note in and kind of build a possible scale or a mode around that and see what's going on. So that one in particular would be kind of Dorian. Right? Because it's moving so rapidly. Now, if it was super slow, the same chords, and I was going, something like that where it's way slower. Now the possibilities open up again because I can decide on the mode or scale shape chord by chord in that situation because they're being held out so much longer. When their progressions are moving so fast, you kind of have to internalize everything all together and make your decision off that. So with that, because I was playing all power chords super slowly, I could think super modally if I wanted to. I could play C Dorian over this, and then I go to E flat. I could play E flat Mixolydian or whatever. I go to F. I could play F Lydian. I don't know. I go here, so I can go chord by chord because the progression's so slow. So when it comes to deciding if you should use a mode or not, it really comes about the pacing of what's going on, but also what chords are happening. To better demonstrate this, I created a track that's 1, 4, 5 in C major with just power chords though. So it's going to be a C power chord to an F to a G, but they hold out 2 bars each, so it's probably enough time to do something modal over it. So I could see that as a progression and be like, oh, that's just C major. And so watch, I could play over that C major, no problem. Right? But I could also internalize that as C minor. I could play, or actually, we could just say that as C Dorian. Right? Because it's just playing power chords. There's nothing saying I can't play major. There's nothing saying I can't play Dorian. Let's do Mixolydian this time. Now, I technically can't play C Lydian through the whole progression. The reason why, C Lydian would give me an F sharp. But I could play C Lydian and then go to C major. So check this out. What if we played C Lydian over the C chord and then go to C? Actually, we'll do this. We'll go C Lydian over the C chord, the C5 chord, because I can do that. There's nothing saying I can't do that. And then we'll go Dorian, C Dorian on the rest. Let's try that out. It's a weird sound, but that's totally possible. We could also go C minor of the whole thing, just straight up minor. Aeolian. Now, those are obviously kind of weird and unconventional ways to play over that, but it goes to show you that when you have a very bare bones rhythm section, you can really be creative with what you want to do there. Now, for example, my favorite guitar player, Michael Schenker, he interprets things very much in the Mixolydian kind of field, maybe like Dorian blues sometimes, but he really likes the Mixolydian sound. So he'd hear that progression and lead more in that Mixolydian sound. Now, some other players might just like the minor scale, and so they'll just approach it in that way. What's cool about power chords in this way, because they're so simple and they give us only a few amount of notes to choose from, which allows us when we're playing lead to be really creative. You can really hear how certain guitar players sound. So like Michael Schenker to me sounds like a very Mixolydian player. It sounds really, really cool. It makes him stand out. Where other players, maybe like Slash, is a little bit more minor of a player, right? It's a different sound. And you could put these guys over the same track, the same rock and roll track, and they're going to sound a little bit different because of that, because they're leaning into these modal sounds at times. All right, the last thing before we dive into a very useful, practical way to look and use the modes on the fretboard is, do we actually need to know the modes? I think the easy answer is no, because, for example, I was just talking about Michael Schenker, who loves Mixolydian, but I don't think Michael Schenker knows anything about theory, and he definitely doesn't know anything about modes or Mixolydian. But he still plays the modes, and he still plays Mixolydian and Dorian and all these other things. It comes down to your ear and what kind of story you want to tell. You know, if you boxing yourself into the theoretical right thing at all times is going to potentially, not always, but potentially limit your creativity. But if you listen first, use your ear first to guide you to your note choices, you'll see the possibilities open up so much wider. Now, should you sit down and really master the major scale and learn how to use all the modes within the major scale? Absolutely. I think every guitar player should do that. These legendary, iconic guitar players that we look up to, they're just honestly blessed with really, really good ears, tons of creativity. Us average guitar players, without that just perfect ear and creativity that they have, if we just ignore theory in doing that, we're going to hold ourselves back so much. When you learn the major scale and you understand how it works and how the modes can be found with it, it really just opens up and makes music so much easier, and it makes creating different sounds and telling different stories so much easier as well. So do you have to know the modes? No. Should you learn the major scale and the modes eventually? I think so, absolutely. Now, one thing I really wanted to show today that I keep seeing is these scale shapes. Players thinking this scale shape is somehow Lydian. This is Mixolydian. Aeolian. Dorian. If you're thinking those scale shapes are these modes, they are not. That is just the major scale, and you're playing different positions of the major scale. It's not until a new tonal center is being presented, and then it is able to create that mode. So before we dive into the practical, easy side of modes, the important things that I have found that really help is to kind of also know what the difference between each mode is. It's quite simple. First, we need to always remember that 1, 4, 5 are always major, and that means Ionian, that means Lydian, and that means Mixolydian. When you hear those terms, you need to hear major right away. That's going to really, really be important because that's the modal sound they are. Now, 2, 3, 6, are always minor. That's going to be your Dorian, that's going to be Phrygian, and that's going to be Aeolian. If you hear those terms, think minor right away. And then Locrian's super weird. It's it's kind of more diminished. It's got a diminished triad going on there. It's not a fully diminished sounding mode, but it's the most weird one there is. You need to understand, we talked about way earlier in the video, the intervals found within the major scale. That's super important to distinguish between what's the difference between Ionian or the major scale and the two other major modes that we find. Distinctly what the difference is, intervallically, we're seeing in Mixolydian, for example, we're seeing a flat 7, so a minor 7. So if we analyzed the intervals of the major scale, which is a major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major 6, and major 7, the only thing that's changing when Mixolydian comes into the picture, it's still the major scale, but it has a minor 7. So, and on guitar, all that means is really we're moving it down, moving it backwards, or flattening it one by 1 fret. Now, Lydian, what's the difference there? The only intervallic difference there is we have an augmented fourth, a sharp 4. So instead of a perfect fourth, we move it up 1 fret, and that gives us that Lydian sound. Every other interval is the identical interval that we'll find in the major scale. So remembering that, so when you hear Lydian, think sharp 4, augmented fourth. When you hear Mixolydian, think flat 7, minor 7. I don't really believe in the minor scale, but it's helpful in this situation. So the minor scale, what are the intervals of the minor scale? We have a major second, then a minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, a minor 6th, and then minor 7th. So those are the intervals to memorize. When you hear minor, that's kind of the general understanding of what the minor scale is intervallically. Dorian, though, what does it do? It changes 1 note, changes the 6. Instead of a minor 6, it presents a major 6. That's the only thing. Everything else is identically the same. It's 100% just like the minor scale. And the minor scale in this situation is the Aeolian mode, by the way. So that's, when you hear minor scale, it's Aeolian mode. And that's kind of how we found, that's our foundation of understanding the other minor modes. What is Phrygian? Phrygian is the minor scale. It's a minor mode, but it's changing 1 note. Instead of a major second, it's got a minor second. So basically, E to F, that 1-step movement, that's what kind of distinguishes Phrygian. Everything else is identical to just the minor scale. Once you organize major modes and minor modes, and then you understand what is the intervallic formula of a major scale and what's the intervallic formula of the minor scale, you can see that the 2 alterations that we see, like Lydian and Mixolydian, are the major scale alterations that have 1 note difference each. And then the minor modes, Dorian and Phrygian, so it's pretty simple once you organize them to major and minor to understand what is really setting them apart to make that sound. So when you hear the Lydian sound, what you're hearing is a major scale with that sharp 4. Right? Major scale just has this. Mixolydian has that flat 7, which is a major scale flat 7. Everything else is the same. What does Dorian sound like? Dorian is a minor scale. With a major 6. Back to minor. And then Phrygian is just the minor scale with a minor second interval instead of a major second. Right? So all I was doing there, I went through all 6 of those modes. I'm not going to look at Locrian right now, but that's literally all that's happening. You first need to memorize what are the minor modes, and then what are the major modes, and then understand what is the distincting factor, right? So Aeolian's kind of our foundational minor scale that we base things off of, and Ionian mode's the major scale, which is the intervals that we've based the other modes off of. But there's really only 4 distinctions that you need to make to memorize is the sharp 4 for Lydian, the minor 7 for Mixolydian, the major 6 for Dorian, and then the minor second for Phrygian. And real quick, the kind of distincting thing with Locrian, which is built off the 7th note of the major scale, it's got a minor second interval and a flat 5. so diminished fifth as well. That's what makes it distinct, is those two actual notes. It's got that minor second, which is really dissonant. Then it's got the diminished fifth, flat 5, which is also dissonant. So it's a really kind of dark. Let's just play it real quick, for example here. This is just the major scale. All right, all these notes are just plug and play in the major scale in different ways. All right, so to end off the video, we're just gonna dive into the practical application. Now, this is not theory. This is not music theory. This is Jordan Steele theory. This is how I've envisioned it and found it to work the easiest way possible. I think it's the most simplest possible way. And it builds, again, off understanding that 1, 4, 5 are always major modes, 2, 3, 6 are always minor. And we might talk about Locrian a little bit. All right, so to me, the pentatonic scale is always the foundation of everything I play. I think from practically speaking, when we play lead guitar, the pentatonic scale is our foundation, and the modes are the same. So if I hear Lydian, all I'm thinking right off the bat is major pentatonic. So if someone says F Lydian, we're an F Lydian, I'm thinking F major pentatonic, right? It's part of all the notes of the C major scale, but I'm thinking F major pentatonic. So I see this shape usually, starting off. Right? And to be honest, let's just put it on there real quick. F note here, and I'm gonna play, this is just F major pentatonic. It works perfect. Right? Sounds good. So if a track is an F Lydian, just play F major pentatonic. You're good to go. Is it gonna sound like some high-tech modal stuff? It's not, but it's gonna sound good no matter what, right? If the song's in G Mixolydian, what do I hear? I hear G major pentatonic. So let's put G on here real quick. If someone says we're in D Dorian, what do I hear? I hear D minor pentatonic. Let's put D on. If I hear A minor, Aeolian, A minor pentatonic. Same thing with E Phrygian. I see E minor pentatonic. Right, so that's what I would recommend practically speaking. When you hear these modes, think about what pentatonic is it? Is it major? Is it minor? And just start off with that. Now, we're going to obviously dip a little bit further into it, practically speaking. And then this is something I've noticed fingering-wise. Again, this is not necessarily theory, what I'm about to dive into, but it will create a modal sound, and it's a part of muscle memorizing shape. So understanding relative major and minor is very important. For example, C major and A minor pentatonic. Let's start with that. C major pentatonic, A minor pentatonic. They share the exact same scale shapes, right? When we muscle memorize C major, we're also muscle memorizing A minor. When we're playing A minor pentatonic, we're also playing C major pentatonic. Practically speaking, in how we play the guitar, they're the same exact thing. They don't feel any different. When I actually build out to the minor scale or build out to the major scale, it's the same thing too. Like if I put a C on, it's going to sound like major. If I do the same thing over A, though, it's going to sound minor. Right? Now, the same thing happens with all the other modes. There's relative major and minor within the mode. So when you see F major, the relative minor of that is D minor, right? And so in the case of C major, the 4 is F, and that builds Lydian. And then the D builds Dorian, right? So practically speaking, the fingerings for Lydian, F Lydian in this case, or any Lydian, is the same fingerings that you'll use for Dorian. They coexist together as relative scales. So let's do that real quick. So I'm going to go to D minor, and I'm going to play the D note, and I'm going to play D minor pentatonic, and then D Dorian. So I'm just going to add the major 6 in. Just pentatonic. If I switch to F though, and I play the same fingerings, it's going to be Lydian. Right? They share fingerings, right? And also, if we even go down back to the pentatonic, F major pentatonic is D minor pentatonic. They're the exact same thing, right? Let's go to G Mixolydian. All right, G Mixolydian and E Phrygian, same fingerings. Let's check that out. Let's go to E real quick. So I'm thinking E minor pentatonic, but I gotta hit that minor second interval. But if I go to G Mixolydian, do the same fingering. Back to E minor, E Phrygian. Back to G Mixolydian. Right? They share fingering, so keep that in mind. Ionian, Aeolian share fingerings. That's the major and minor scale. Lydian and Dorian share the same fingerings. Mixolydian and Phrygian share the same fingerings, right? Now, obviously, there's a different tonal center, different resolution point, but they're the same exact thing. So to get into modes, first of all, you need to understand the major scale is the modes. There's no Mixolydian scale shape. That doesn't exist, okay? None of those. There's no Lydian scale shape. That's just all the major scale. That's all you're doing is major scale. But practically speaking, when you play guitar, think pentatonic first, right? You need to really understand that Lydian's major, Ionian's major, Mixolydian's major. And then you really need to understand that Dorian, Phrygian, and Aeolian are minor. And then always sum it back down to the pentatonic. We all know and love the pentatonic. I always sum it down to the box 1 of pentatonic. How can I play box 1 pentatonic of F Lydian? It's very simple. We just play F major pentatonic right here. And when it comes time, I look at it as Dorian. It's the same fingers as Dorian. Right? And then when I see D Dorian, I think D minor pentatonic, which is the same thing. And I hit the same note. Now, what happens, the difference here, let's look at it a little bit more detailed. Because this is all intervallic sounds that are being created. It's not about the fingerings on guitar are the exact same. You muscle memorize one, you have muscle memorized them all, basically. But what's happening, if I'm playing D Dorian, this B note is acting as a major 6 interval to the tonal center of D. However, over the relative major F Lydian, that B note is acting as a sharp 4. Right? In this case. Also, for example, if we go down to minor, really what makes minor sound minor distinctly is the minor 6. It's kind of a nasty sounding note. So over the A, if I play an F note, that's a minor 6 of A. It sounds like that. If I play that over C though, it's a sus4 now. It's the 4. Completely different sound. Hear that? It sounds completely different. That's all that's happening with modes. We're not playing anything different. The hands, the technique, the muscle memorization is the exact same. As long as we put our fingers in the right spot on the fretboard, it's the exact same muscle memorization. It just naturally changes the intervallic sound. So if we go to Mixolydian, to make Mixolydian sound like Mixolydian, we need to start off by hitting the major 3rd with it. So we hit G, major 3rd, and then we'll add in an F natural. And that gives us that Mixolydian dominant 7 sound. So to quickly summarize this video, we have the theoretical aspect of modes, and then we all moved all the way down to the simple and pragmatic way of using modes that I've found to be super, super helpful over the years. So the first thing is, all a mode is the major scale, and it's when the tonal center is not the root of the major scale. That is what a mode is, and it creates a sound. Now, why does it create a different sound even though it's the same notes? It's just because of the intervals that are being created, right? The same notes have different sounds when the interval relationship is different. Next, when you are playing the major scale on the fretboard, what you need to learn, you should learn all positions of the major scale. You're not playing modes, you're just playing the major scale. It's not until there's a tonal center given that you're playing those notes that a mode will be created, right? There's no such thing as the Dorian shape or Phrygian or whatever. That's just position 2 and 3 of the major scale in reality. But what is the Dorian sound? Dorian sound, for example, is minor at its foundation. And it's specifically the difference between that and minor, though, is the major 6. So when you hear Dorian, think minor, but major 6. When you hear Phrygian, think minor, but minor second interval, right? That's the distinguishing factor. What is Lydian? Lydian is major, but sharp 4, augmented 4th. What is Mixolydian? Mixolydian, again, major scale. But the alteration is going to be that 7th, it's going to be a minor 7th. Now, Aeolian, again, that's our kind of standard of what the minor scale is. So that's the standard that we're basing Dorian and Phrygian off of. Same thing with Ionian. That's the major scale. That's the standard that we're basing Lydian and Mixolydian with. And then Locrian's kind of its own thing. I kind of internalize Locrian more minor. I think that's because it has that minor 3rd distinguishing about it, but also has that flat 5. So we don't have the full kind of minor. We can't call it a minor scale because we don't have the fundamental 5th. That's a perfect 5th that we need for the minor scale. But it's definitely more dissonant and minor than anything. But anyways, that's the kind of thing. So understand that. That's what's write all this down, make notes about it. And then practically speaking, when you hear these modes, think pentatonic first. When you hear Ionian, Lydian, or Mixolydian, think major pentatonic first. And then when you hear Dorian, Phrygian, or Aeolian, you're thinking minor pentatonic first. Now, if you take what we just talked about of understanding what intervals are kind of distinct about each, and then you apply that to the pentatonic, you will be instantly sounding modal. But also, we all know the pentatonic scale. We do it all the time. This will make it where you can play any mode right off the bat because you're putting the foundation within the correct pentatonic scale shape. You're understanding the distinction between the proper note, the proper intervals that need to be changed, and therefore you are ready to go to create and make that modal sound. Also, practically speaking, understanding that there's only 3 actual fingerings our hands are muscle memorizing. We're muscle memorizing what we see from Ionian to Aeolian, those relative scales. We're muscle memorizing what we see from Lydian and Dorian. Those are the same exact fingerings. And then we're muscle memorizing what we see with Mixolydian and Phrygian. Those are the same fingerings. So there's actually only 3 fingerings that our hands have to muscle memorize to create these different sounds. All right, well, that's all for today. I hope you found this video very, very insightful and valuable and simple. I really hope so. And I'll see you guys next time.